Sahana Vavatu, Sahano Bhunaktu, Sahaviryan Karavavahayi, Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahayi. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Okay, good. Welcome back to our Saturday morning Bhagavad Gita class, our webcast. We begin each class with some recitation. We'll begin with verse 26. And please glance at the translation so that you know what you're reciting as you recite after me. Tatra pashyat sthitan parthaha, Tatra pashyat sthitan parthaha, Pitrnata pitamahan, Pitrnata pitamahan, Acharyan matulan bratran, Acharyan matulan bratran, Putran pautran sakinstata, Putran pautran sakinstata, Swashuran suhridaschaiva, Swashuran suhridaschaiva, Senayorubayorapi, Senayorubayorapi, Tan samiksha sakaunteyaha, Tan samiksha sakaunteyaha, Sarvan bandhunavastitan, Sarvan bandhunavastitan, Kripaya paraya vishto, Kripaya paraya vishto, Vishidan niram abravita, Vishidan niram abravita, Arjuna vacha, Arjuna vacha, Drishtve mam swajanam Krishna, Drishtve mam swajanam Krishna, yuyutsam samupastitam, yuyutsam samupastitam, sidanti mama gatrani, sidanti mama gatrani, mukan cha parishusyati, mukan cha parishusyati, vepatushcha sharire me, Vepatushcha shari me, Romaharshascha jayate, Romaharshascha jayate, Gandhivam sramsate hastat, Gandhivam sramsate hastat, Tvakchaiva paridahyate, Tvakchaiva paridahyate, Nacha shaknom yavastatum, Nacha shaknom yavastatum, Brahmati vacha me manaha, Brahmati vacha me manaha, Nimittani cha pashyami, Nimittani cha pashyami, Viparitani keshava, Viparitani keshava, Nacha shreyo nupashyami, Nacha shreyo nupashyami, Hatva swajana mahave, Hatva swajana mahave, Nakangshe vijayam Krishna, Nakangshe vijayam Krishna, Nacharajam sukhani cha, Nacharajam sukhani cha, Kinno Rajena Govinda, Kinno Rajena Govinda, Kim Bhogarji Vitena va, Kim Bhogarji Vitena va, Yeshamarte Kangshitam no, Yeshamarte Kangshitam no, Rajam Bhoga Sukhani cha, Rajyam bhoga sukhani cha, tahi me vastita yuddhe, tahi me vastita yuddhe, pranan styaktva dhanani cha, pranans tyaktva dhanani cha acharya pitara putras acharya pitara putras tataiva cha pitamaha tataiva cha pitamaha matula shvashura pautraha matula shvashura pautraha shala sambandhinastata shala sambandhinastata etanahantumichhami etanahantumichhami gnatopi madhusudana Ganatopi madhusudana apitrailokya rajena apitrailokya rajena apitrailokya rajasya apitrailokya rajasya heto kim numahi krite heto kim numahi krite. We'll stop our chanting there and pick up the thread where we left off. So we're at this extremely dramatic point in chapter 1 where Arjuna has just asked Sri Krishna to drive their chariot out onto the battlefield. Arjuna looks on both sides of the battlefield and he sees family members on both sides, and he realizes, maybe for the first time, that thousands and thousands of his own family members are going to die on that battlefield in the next 18 days of battle. And Arjuna has what we humorously called an emotional meltdown. The symptoms he describes, we saw this 30th verse, but look at it. He describes a panic attack. He says, Gandhivam sramsate hastat. From my hand, my bow slips down. Twakchaiva paridakyate. My skin is burning. Nacha shaknom yavastatum brahmati eva me manaha. My mind is spinning. Brahmati eva me manaha. Nacha shaknomi avastatum, and I can't even stand up any longer. He's so dizzy he can't stand up. And notice this is all his emotional reaction overcoming him, and he can't even stand up. Arjuna, as we pointed out at the very end of the last class, Arjuna has been knocked off his feet on the battlefield before the first weapon has been wielded, and has been knocked off his feet by his own emotions, his own emotional reaction. This is not only dramatic, but it's really significant for several reasons. One, as we said in a prior class, the context of the Bhagavad Gita is not a spiritual problem. The context of the Bhagavad Gita is Arjuna's emotional problem. And what's unique about the Bhagavad Gita is it gives this brilliant spiritual solution to Arjuna's emotional problem. In this way, the Bhagavad Gita has tremendous relevancy for us all, because we all suffer from emotional problems. More than that, and I want to return to this point because the today's class is going to be focused on the consequences of this inner battle. We said the inner battle is at several levels. One is, there's the physical battlefield, Kurukshetra. There's a symbolic battle between dharma and adharma. Now we come to this inner battle, a battle between what Arjuna intellectually knows he should do. Arjuna knows this is a dharma yuddha. Arjuna knows this battle must be fought to restore dharma. And Arjuna knows very well that not to fight the battle will have worse consequences than fighting the battle. Arjuna knows all of this very clearly, but his emotions are repulsed at the idea of fighting against his own family members. So here we have the inner battle, the battle between intellect and emotions. Or as I said in the last class, the battle between head and heart, to use some common expressions. It's also a battle between Arjuna. What drives your behavior? And this is the general topic for today. What drives our behavior? Is our behavior driven by dharma, or is our behavior driven by what feels good? You know, I think in the 1960s and 70s in America, there was a popular saying, "Follow your heart." Well, if you think about that prescription for life, it's really dangerous and stupid, sorry to use the word. Follow your heart means do whatever you feel like, regardless of the consequences. Perhaps that's not what that expression meant, but on the surface, this follow your heart philosophy means to do whatever feels good, regardless of the consequences. And obviously that is a ridiculous and harmful basis for making decisions in life. To make decisions, you have to evaluate a situation. You have to consider various alternatives and their consequences, and you have to choose the best possible decision in that particular situation. Tell me, you have a powerful intellect and you have powerful emotions, but which of those two faculties, the faculty of your intellect or the faculty of your emotions, which faculty is designed for this decision-making process, to evaluate a situation, evaluate options, consider consequences, choose the best? Our emotions are not designed for that. Our emotions are designed for feeling emotions. Now let's be very clear here. This discussion is not to in any way denigrate our emotions. Emotions make us human. If we didn't have emotions, we'd be like robots. Thank goodness we have emotions. The point here is that emotions are meant for feeling feelings. Emotions are not meant for making decisions. I'll say that again. Emotions are not meant for making decisions. Our intellect is the instrument with which we make decisions. And when we make decisions based not on our intellects, but when we make decisions based purely on our emotions, those are the decisions that get us in trouble. Follow your heart. And this really is Arjuna's dilemma. This is the inner battle. This is the inner conflict that is so intense. Arjuna has had a panic attack and has been knocked off his feet by the strength of his emotional reaction. So Arjuna has the same problem. His intellect says the war must be fought because the consequences of not fighting are far worse, but Arjuna's emotions say, don't fight. This is Arjuna's conflict, and of course it's symbolic of everyone's conflict in life. And we're going to see in the coming verses in today's class, we're going to see how Arjuna responds to this inner conflict. And I'll give it away in advance. He doesn't respond very well at all. Of course, if he responded properly, we wouldn't have a Bhagavad Gita because Sri Krishna wouldn't need to teach him. Arjuna responds very poorly. Let's see his response. Repeat after me. Nimittani cha pashyami, nimittani cha pashyami, viparitani keshava, viparitani keshava, na cha shreyo nupashyami, na cha shreyo nupashyami, hatva swajana mahave, hatva swajana mahave. Starting with this verse, we're going to see how Arjuna's emotional reaction is so intense that it begins to distort his intellect. And this is the problem, with the capital T. Why do intelligent, good people make such terrible mistakes in life? And it happens all the time. Intelligent, dharmic people end up doing things which cause great harm to themselves and others. Why? And the answer is, and what we're going to see very vividly in today's class, is this. Our emotions are so powerful, can be so powerful, that they take over. They take over and distort the way our intellects work. When our intellects are unimpeded, they're a pretty good guide to determining what is dharma and adharma. But the fact is, our intellects are subject to being distorted. Our intellectual reasoning, let me say, our reasoning powers, our reasoning is capable of being distorted by the power of emotions. And we'll see how that happens to Arjuna. First of all, he says, Nimittani cha pashyami, pashyami, I see. Nimittani, omens. What kind of omens? Viparitani, bad omens. I see bad omens. Keshava, O Krishna, I see bad omens. Omens in the sense of superstition. Arjuna is by nature not a superstitious person, but right now, because as he's on the battlefield being overpowered by his emotions, he's starting to see these bad omens. In this country, they speak of seeing a black cat. Or in an Indian context, maybe you see a crow, or you see this lizard on your wall. Or a commentator says when your left eye starts to twitch, that's an omen. So here, Arjuna, who's a highly intelligent and mighty warrior, is starting to worry about these omens he sees, these superstitions, which he knows better. He knows these superstitions are silly, but he begins to pay attention to these bad omens, and he says, Nacha, and further, na anupashyami, in the third line, I don't see shreyas, I don't see any good, hatva, in the killing, swajanam, of our own family members, ahave, in this battle. Ahave, in this battle, na anupashyami, I don't see any shreyas, any good coming out of it, because how can good come out of killing our own family members? Well, this is so typical of the distortion of intellect. So on the surface, it absolutely looks like how can good come out of killing? Well, remember our discussion of dharma yuddha. There are unique situations in which not to kill enemies causes more harm than letting them live. Of course, killing is harmful. But there are times when not to kill causes more harm. Remember the silly example I gave in a prior class. cutting with a knife, cutting flesh open with a knife sounds very horrible unless that knife is in the hands of a skilled surgeon who is performing surgery to save a patient's life. Generally, cutting flesh open with a knife is harmful. But if a patient needs surgery not to cut the flesh, causes more harm. But notice here, Arjuna isn't thinking like that. He says, I don't see any possible good that can come out of killing our own family members. Clearly, Arjuna's intellect has been distorted by the force of his emotions, and we'll see how that continues. Nakankshe vijayam Krishna, nakankshe vijayam Krishna, nacharajyam sukhani cha, nacharajyam sukhani cha, kim no rajena govinda, kim no rajena govinda, kim bhogar jivite va, kim bhogar jivite va. Krishna, Arjuna addresses his friend and charioteer. Na kankshye, I do not desire vijayam, victory. I don't desire victory. Nacha rajyam, I don't desire the kingdom. Nacha sukhani, nor do I desire the joys, the happiness, the pleasures that he would enjoy having fought and conquered his enemies. So he says, I don't want to be victorious, I don't want to rule the kingdom, and I don't want the pleasures of the kingdom. Well, in one way it's correct. To fight a war just merely for the sake of victory, you want to be you want to just be the world emperor. Some kind of ego thing, that would be a problem. So to fight a war merely for the sake of victory is certainly a problem. To fight the war for the sake of King Rajyam, we said before, for the sake of real estate, for the sake of territory, is not valid justification for a war, nor is to fight a war for sukha, for pleasure, for happiness. I gave the example to fight for the sake of oil that's in another land. These are not valid justifications for fighting a war. What is a valid justification is dharma, to restore dharma again. A dharma yuddha is one in which not to fight has worse consequences. Notice that Arjuna leaves off dharma. He says, I don't want vijayam, victory. I don't want rajyam, to rule the kingdom. I don't want sukhani, fine. But he should be fighting for dharma. He doesn't mention that. More evidence of how his thinking has been distorted by the power of his emotions. And he continues, Govinda, O Krishna. Our commentator, Madhusudana, likes to explain all these words. Govinda is a famous name for Sri Krishna. The surface meaning is cowherd. Go, cow. Go means cow. Vinda, the root vind, is to find. So the one whose job it is to find the cows when they wander off is Govinda. But our commentator gives a more sophisticated name. Go generally means cow. Go can mean senses. Your five senses: sight, hearing, taste, touch, and smell. So in this case, Govinda has the same meaning as Hrishikesha. Remember Hrishikesha? The Isha, the Lord of the Hrishika senses. Here, the one who is the Vinda, the one who finds or controls the go, the senses. So Govinda in that sense means the same as Hrishika, Lord of the senses. Okay, Govinda, O Krishna, Kim Naha Rajena. Kim Rajena, nice Sanskrit idiom. What is the use of Rajena? What's the use of ruling the kingdom? Naha, for us. What is the use of, what do we get out of it? What's the purpose? What's the use of the kingdom? Kim Bhogaihi, what's the use of all these pleasures? Kim Jivitenava, or what is the use of even living? Now, the first two sound somewhat reasonable. What's the use of getting the kingdom? Fine. The war should not be fought for the kingdom. Kim bhogaihi, what's the use of pleasures? Good. Arjuna understands a war is not justified by gaining a kingdom for the sake of pleasures. But then he takes one step too far, so to speak. Kim jivitena, what's the use of living? Huh. Arjuna is speaking as many deeply depressed people speak. How can I go on? What's the use of living? These are the words of someone who's deeply depressed. These are the words of someone whose thinking has been so distorted by depression, by sadness, by grief, that you don't even see a purpose in living. So Arjuna's words here really reveal the depth of his depression. Now, the war has not yet been fought, but Arjuna knows that the consequence of the war is going to be the death of thousands of his beloved family members. So psychologists use a term, anticipatory grief, meaning even before they've died, Arjuna is already grieving their loss, and that tremendous grief causes depression, and that deep depression leads him to say, Kim jivitena, what's the use of living? How can I go on? Then, Yesham arte kangshitam no, Yesham arte kangshitam no, Rajyam bhoga sukhani cha, Rajyam bhoga sukhani cha, tahi me vastita yuddhe, tahi me vastita yuddhe, pranan styaktva dhanani cha, pranan styaktva dhanani cha. More evidence of Arjuna's thinking, his rational thinking, being highly distorted by the strength of the emotions. He argues. He makes an argument that on the surface sounds okay, but his argument is actually highly distorted. He says, Yesham arte, those for whose sakes, Yesham arte, those for whose sakes, kangshitam naha, we seek, we desire, we pursue Rajyam, regaining the kingdom. Remember, they've been deprived, the Pandavas were cheated out of remember this wonderful story, we won't retell it. They were cheated out of the kingdom by the rigged dice game. Remember Shakuni playing against Yudhishthira in this rigged dice game? We won't retell that story. Anyway, they were cheated out of the kingdom, and referring to that, Arjuna says here, Kangshitam Naha, we seek Rajyam, regaining the kingdom we were cheated out of. Kangshitam Naha, we seek Bhogaha, the pleasures of regaining the kingdom. We seek Sukhani Cha, we seek the pleasures that we would have having regained the kingdom. We seek all of that, Yesham arte, for their sakes. For whose sakes? Interesting argument. He's those for whom we seek to restore the kingdom and regain the pleasures and of the kingdom. Te ime, the word, the A of te drops due to grammar rules. Te ime, all of them, avastitaha, are standing here, yuddhe, in this battle, on this battlefield. All of them are standing here, pranan tyaktva, giving up their lives, dhananicha, and giving up their wealth, giving up every, of course, if you give up your life, you give up your wealth, giving up everything. Look at the argument Arjuna makes here. Those for whose sakes we are fighting this battle, they are standing here on the battlefield, giving up their lives. So he argues, what's the point of fighting this battle if those for whose sakes we're fighting are going to die on the battlefield? On the surface, it sounds like a good argument. But here again, Arjuna's emotions have overwhelmed him to such an extent that he's lost sight of the fact that it is a dharma yuddha. He's making a valid point that so many of those who would benefit from winning this war will die on the battlefield. Absolutely true. Yet it remains a fact that if Arjuna doesn't fight the battle, the consequences are far worse. That's the point. This is more evidence of how his intellect, his irrational thinking has been perverted, let us say, by the strength of his emotions. Ta ime, te ime avastita, those who are standing here on the battlefield about to die. And then he elaborates. He actually tells who they are. Who are those who are going to die on the battlefield and be deprived of the benefits of fighting the war and victory? Arjuna enumerates them. Acharya pitara putras, acharya pitara putras, tataiva cha pitamaha, tataiva cha pitamaha, matula shvashura pautraha, matula shvashura pautraha, shala sambandhinastata, shala sambandhinastata. Who are they? Assembled on a battlefield, who are going to perish on a battlefield and reap the benefits of victory. Sri Krishna, Arjuna, speaking to Sri Krishna, elaborates, enumerates them. He says, Acharyaha, our teachers, Dronacharya, Kripacharya, Pitaraha, our fathers, Putraha, our sons, Arjuna's son Abhimanyu, Tataiva cha Pitamaha, and our grandfathers, Pitamaha, plural, our grandfathers, Bhishma, of course, Matulaha, our uncles, Shakuni and the rest, Shvashuraha, our fathers-in-law, all these family terms, Pautraha, our grandsons, Shalaha, our brothers-in-law, Tata, and Sambandhinaha, all of these relatives. So here Arjuna elaborates and points out in great detail to Sri Krishna, all of these family members are gathered here on the battlefield, and a great many of them are going to die. If they die, they will not reap the benefits of victory, so why should we fight? Again, Arjuna is not thinking about the consequences of not fighting the war. He's looking at one side. The consequences of fighting the war are horrible, but the consequences of not fighting the war are even worse, and he's not considering that at this point because of his emotions. Okay, then. Etan ahantumichami, etan ahantumichami, knatopi madhusudana, knatopi madhusudana, api trailokya rajyasya, api trailokya rajyasya, hetu kim numahi krite, hetu kim numahi krite. Na ichchami, the first line. I do not want hantum, to kill. I do not want to kill etan. All of these. All of whom? All of these he's just narrated in a prior verse. Etan, all of these family members, remember, on both sides of the battlefield, all of them, nahantum ichchami, I don't want to kill them. Knataha api, even if I am killed. This is the first time Arjuna is suggesting that it would be better for him to die than for all of his family members to die. This, and we'll see this at the very end of the chapter, I think in the next class. Arjuna is beginning to think in terms of the fact that it would be better for him to die than for all of his family members to die. But we'll see this more later, but look at how distorted his thinking is. First of all, Arjuna is crucial for the Pandava victory. If Arjuna does not fight, the Pandavas cannot possibly win. But Arjuna now is saying, it would be better if I were to be killed on his battlefield so that they don't have to die. Again, Arjuna is only looking at the consequences of fighting the war. Arjuna is not considering the consequences of not fighting the war. His intellect has been distorted by his emotions. Madhusudana, or Krishna, the Sudana, the one who killed the demon Madhu. I think the story comes in the Bhagavata Purana. Arjuna kills the demon Madhu. Madhusudana, O Krishna, it would be I don't want to kill all my beloved family members, even if I were killed. And he says, I don't want to kill them, api, even for the sake of Trailokya Rajyasya, even if I could gain Rajya, even if I could become king, Trailokya, of the three worlds, heaven, earth, and the intermediate world, the three worlds, even for the sake of ruling over the three worlds, I wouldn't want to fight this war. Kim nu, another Sanskrit idiom, kim nu, much less would I fight this war, he toho, for the sake, mahi krite, of ruling this little kingdom. To make it clear, Arjuna says, I wouldn't fight for the sake of becoming king of the three worlds. Then how would I possibly fight for the sake of this limited kingdom? Notice how, very interesting, how we're all capable of using our intellects to argue for the wrong thing. We call this rationalization. Rationalization is when you use your intellect to argue for the wrong thing. A good example, my favorite example of this is when you say, just this once. What a famous example of rationalization. When you say just this once, you're saying that in the context of you're about to do something you know is wrong, but yet you give yourself permission to do it anyway with the very weak excuse, lame excuse, that you're only going to do it once and you're not going to do it again. Just this once is an example of rationalization, and it is ridiculous. First of all, the fact that you say just this once means it's wrong. So if it's wrong, you shouldn't even do it once. Even doing it once is wrong. And then further, the rationalization is, I won't do it a second time, but if you do it once, you're more likely to do it a second time and third time and fourth time. So this is, we call it rationalization. It's misuse of our intellectual powers to give ourselves an excuse to do something we know is wrong. That's what Arjuna is doing here. He is misusing the intellect, which is so powerful and which can keep us on the path of dharma. That intellect can be hijacked, as it were, by our emotions. And when our intellect gets hijacked by our emotions, we can rationalize anything. We can make an excuse to do any kind of adharma. That is rationalization. That's a huge problem when our intellects are overcome, hijacked, as it were, by our emotions. Arjuna continues. Nahatya dharshtarashtranaha Nahatya dhartarashtranaha Ka priti sya janardana Ka priti sya janardana Papamevashrayedasman Papamevashrayedasman Hatvaitanatatayiнаha Hatvaitanatatayiнаha. More rationalization. Nahatya, having killed, Dhartarashtran, having killed these 100 sons of Dhritarashtra and all the other warriors on the other side of the battle, all the warriors that represent adharma. Nahatya, having killed Dhartarashtran, the sons of Dhritarashtra, meaning symbolically, having defeated adharma, is what it symbolically represents. Ka pritihi syat, what pleasure would there be? End of the first line, naha, for us. Naha, for us, ka pritihi syat, what pleasure could there be for us? Nahatya, in killing Dhartarashtran, in killing the sons of Dhritarashtra. What massive rationalization. Again, the sons of Dhritarashtra are the force of adharma. If Arjuna doesn't defeat the forces of adharma, the consequences will be horrible. I gave in the last class the example of World War II. For the United States to enter into World War II, the amount of death, the number of soldiers killed, American soldiers killed, was tremendous. If I remember right, 500,000, if I hope I'm correct, 500,000 United States soldiers lost their lives. I think that's correct. Roughly 500,000 American soldiers, young men, lost their lives in fighting World War II. What horrible loss. But not to fight World War II would have caused a loss. The consequences would have been far, far greater. So Arjuna continues to rationalize, ka pritihi syat, what pleasure would there be, naha, for us, nahatya, in killing, in defeating Dhartarashtran, the sons of Dhritarashtra. What good could come out of defeating the forces of adharma? You can see how distorted Arjuna's thinking is. Janardana, O Krishna, Very powerful name. Arjuna, the one who kills Jana, people. The one who is capable of killing anyone is Janardana, this powerful name for Lord Krishna. And Arjuna continues in the last line, Hatva, having killed, Etan, having killed them. Having killed whom? Atatayinaha. Look at this. Arjuna admits that they are evil people. Atatayan is those who transgress dharma, is the literal meaning of atatayan, those who transgress dharma. So hatva, having killed, etan atatayanaha, having killed these sons of Dhritarashtra, who constantly transgress dharma, Arjuna argues incorrectly. Arjuna rationalizes papam eva ashrayet asman. Asman, for us. Ashrayet, the result for us would be what? Papam eva, sin alone. Only sin would be the result for us if we kill these transgressors of dharma. What kind of logic is that? By killing the transgressors of dharma, you commit an act of punya, not an act of papa. Arjuna argues for the opposite. This is rationalization. By killing those transgressors of dharma, we would be committing sin. No, that's Arjuna's argument, and it's actually absolutely ulta, opposite. It's incorrect. That's the power of rationalization, the power of emotions to twist our reasoning to such an extent that we can make an argument for what is adharma. Again, the intellect, which is meant to help us discern the path of dharma and stay on the path of dharma, that intellect can be twisted by our emotions to such an extent that we can make an argument to follow a path of adharma. Exactly what Arjuna is arguing for. And he concludes here. Arjuna concludes, Tasman arhavayam hantum, Tasman arhavayam hantum, Dhartarashtran swabandhavan, Dhartarashtran swabandhavan, Swajanam hikatam hatva, Swajanam hikatam hatva, Sukhinasyama madhava, Sukhinasyama madhava. Arjuna concludes, Tasmat, therefore, Vayam, we, Na arha, arhaha, hantum. Therefore, na arvayam, we, na arhaha, should not, hantum, kill. Therefore, we should not kill Dhartarashtran, the sons of Dhritarashtra, Swabandhavan, who are our relatives. We should not kill the sons of Dhritarashtra, who are our relatives. Why? Third line, because Swajanam, because they're our relatives. Swajanam. He says, but the argument is katam, how, hatva swajanam, how, by killing our relatives, how, sukhina syama, how can we be happy? What joy can we find in killing our own relatives? Can you see how distorted Arjuna's argument is here? So the argument is for sukhina syama, how can we be happy? What is the goal here on the battlefield? Is the goal to be happy, or is the goal to restore dharma? You see, Arjuna is here arguing. How can we be happy killing our own family members? Absolutely. Killing your own family members is the most atrocious thing you can imagine. It's horrible, absolutely horrible. But again and again, we come back to the point that this is a dharma yuddha. Not the fight has even worse consequences, which Arjuna is overlooked right now because of the strength of his emotions. Arjuna is arguing, this is the essence of that inner battle, the battle between head and heart. Our emotions have their own agenda. What is the agenda of our emotions? What was that I said before? Follow your heart. Do what feels good. And that's what he's saying. Sukhina syama. How can we be happy? So he wants to feel good. Arjuna wants to feel good about himself. How can he feel good about himself if he kills his own family members? That's his heart speaking, so to speak. That's the message of his emotions. But his intellect knows very well, this is a dharma yuddha, it must be fought. So here we have the emotional agenda to feel good is in conflict with the intellectual agenda to follow dharma. In the long run, following dharma will make you feel good. In the short run, it may not. Think about that surgeon cutting open the patient. No one wants to cut another person's flesh. But if that surgeon fails to cut open the patient's flesh, the patient will perish. So this is the conflict between an emotional agenda to feel good and the intellectual agenda to follow dharma. Arjuna addresses Krishna here as Madhava. Madhava, literally, the one who is sweet. That's generally used as a term for the husband of goddess Lakshmi. The husband of goddess Lakshmi is Madhava, Lord Vishnu, Narayana, and Sri Krishna is addressed as Madhava here. Yeah, we'll see this one last argument we'll see here. Distorted argument. One more example of rationalization. Yadyapyete na pashyanti, yadyapyete na pashyanti, lobhopahata chetasaha, lobhopahata chetasaha, kulakshayakritam dosham, kulakshayakritam dosham, mitradrohe cha patakam, mitradrohe cha patakam. This verse is the first part of a sentence. We'll see both parts. Arjuna begins, Yadi api, even if, remember we have to break all these words apart. Yadi api ete. For our Sanskrit students, that's a good exercise to separate those words. Yadi api ete. Yadi api, even if ete, these sons of Dhritarashtra, even if na pashyanti, even if they are unable to see what? In the third line. Even if they can't see, the sons of Dhritarashtra, even if they can't see, in the third line, the dosham, the defect involved in kula kshaya kritam, the defect that results from fighting against your own family, kulakshaya. fact, Arjuna is going to speak a lot about that. So it's family against family, right? Two sides of a family. So Arjuna here says, even if our opponents, the sons of Dhritarashtra, even if napashyanti, even if they can't see the dosha, the defect of fighting against your own family, and in the last line, mitra drohe cha patakam cha, and even if they can't see cha, and even if they can't see patakam, the sin involved of what? Mitra drohe, the sin of going against your own family, mitra friends, the sins of going up against your own family members and friends, even if they cannot see how bad it is to fight against your own family, to go against your own friends. And why would they be unable to see? The second line, lobha upahata chetasaha, because their minds are upahata, overcome by lobha, by greed. So this is Arjuna's one further argument. Even if the sons of Dhritarashtra are unable to see how terrible it is to fight against your own family members and friends, even if they cannot see how bad it is, because loba upahata chetasaha, because their minds are overcome by grief, even then, and a sentence concludes. Katam nagneyam asmabihi, katam nagneyam asmabihi, paparasmat nivartitam, kulakshayakritam dosham, prapashyadbhir janardana. And again, that powerful name, Janardana, O Krishna, O slayer of men. O Krishna. Now, remember, here's the connection we need to see. First verse said, even if the sons of Dhritarashtra can't understand how bad it is to fight against your own family members because their minds are overcome by grief. But Arjuna is going to say in this verse, our minds are not overcome by lobha, by greed. I'm sorry, is that grief? By greed. Their minds are overcome by greed, and that's leading them to fight this terrible war. But our minds are not overcome by grief. By greed, sorry. Their minds are overcome by greed. Our minds are not overcome by greed. So what's our excuse? They have an excuse. Their excuse is their minds are overcome by greed. But our minds are not overcome by greed. Therefore, he says, katam, how, na gneyam asmabihi, by us, and in the last line, pashyadbihi, by us who can see clearly. Asmabihi, by us, pashyadbihi, prapashyadbihi, by us who can clearly see what's going on, by us whose minds are not overcome by greed, by us, nagneyam, katam nagneyam, how could we not understand? Understand what? In the third line, the dosham, the defect of kulakshaya kritam, the terrible harm that would result from fighting against our own family. How could we not understand? Our minds are not overcome by greed. So how could we not understand the terrible consequence by fighting against a war? And how could we not nivartitum? How could we not withdraw? Papad asman nivartitum. How could we not nivartitum refrain? asmat, from this, papat, terrible sin. Asman, the words change due to grammar. Asmat, from this, papat, from this sin. How could we not understand better? Let me put the sentence together better. Asmabihi prapashyadbihi, by us who understand, we understand kulakshaya kratam dosham. We understand the terrible consequence of fighting against our own family members. Our minds are not overcome by greed. Therefore, katam, how na nivartitum, how could we not refrain asmat papat, from this terrible sin, this sin of which is the dosham, which is a result of kulakshayam, fighting against and killing our own family members. So you can see the extent of the distortion of Arjuna's thinking. He's saying their minds are overcome by greed. Therefore they're fighting. Our minds are not overcome by greed. Therefore, how can we not refrain? Therefore, we should refrain from fighting because our minds are not overcome by greed. Greed is not the point here. The point is dharma. Arjuna is unable to consider how bad the consequence will be if he fails to fight. And he is unable to consider that consequence because his emotions have overwhelmed him, distorted his reasoning. Arjuna has fallen prey to all of this rationalization, and rationalization will lead you down the path of adharma. We'll continue this in our next class. Om sarve bhavantu sukhinah, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhaveta, asato ma sadgamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityorma amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat.